Actually, I even worked some of the myrtle rust response, and it was a really good joint activity between, you don't want a reason to have a joint activity like that, but it really did work really well working with our partners at DBCA and utilising the skills that we have to make our surveillance and management better. So this is basically to bring you up to speed. I'm very aware I'm between you and a snack or the bathrooms, so I'll try and go as quickly as possible, and happy to take any questions at the end. So the WA detection, for those who are aware, and hopefully you are by now, it was detected in WA on the 29th of June last year. It was a joint surveillance effort that had been set up with Queensland Department of Agriculture coming over with all of their expertise in myrtle rust, DBCA helping to manage that a lot, and DPIRD as well. And the good thing was, I still have no idea how they found it. It's a really isolated site where they found it, but they found it at a single mound spring in the remote East Kimberley. And if you can look at this photo on the right, you can see just how kind of dry and desolate the land gets around those areas. So they really are little microclimates of moisture and vegetation, and it's very distinct from that surrounding landscape. And if you ever have the benefit of flying over it, you start to realise how even sparse some of that other vegetation as you're coming closer down to Kununurra actually becomes. So it's not the friendliest environment for myrtle rust in that environment. So what we did find there, and I say we in the broadest sense because I was not on this trip, I managed to get sick and then someone else managed to break their wrists, and so other people were there though. What we found was myrtle rust only at this single site, where if you look at the photo below, it had been recently burnt in like the last year. We know from the literature from the East Coast that burns can shift the dynamic with myrtle rust in terms of the host it might approach. Also, you have all that new flush coming up, and for those who don't realise, myrtle rust doesn't affect the whole tree. It's only going to affect the new growing parts of the tree. So you're talking about new flush. It's a bit worrying for some species because that can include new seed pods and flowers and fruits. So, you know, you could be really affecting recruitment. And anyone who's worked on rust before, they just basically can slowly suck the life out of a plant. And so for a bit of context, on the East Coast, you know, 100-year-old syzygium species that you'd think would, you know, they've stood for 100 years, they'll stand for, I don't know, quite 100 more, but for quite a while longer. Just that slow death by 100 cuts, even to all of that new flush at the edges, has slowly killed that tree over there on the East Coast. So it is a worry. And so what we found when we went in there, as we can see, it was a burnt site, so perfect conditions, lots of flush coming up, lots of moisture. These mound springs, you start walking in and you just need to start walking very carefully because your foot might go a good foot or so below where you thought you were. The teams went in late June was when they first detected it, and then they went in by chopper, and then in August they went in again and actually did a little bit more delimiting survey so that we could understand how widespread it was. And I know Peter was involved as well with trying to figure out how do you delimit in such a complex environment. So it really was a group effort, that one. They found it at a single site and only 6 subsites within that entire mound spring. It was, as I said, recently burnt, and it was on 2 Melaleuca species, which Melaleucas are known to be a top host over east as well. So these are just photos of the symptoms, because I can't show you enough symptoms to keep your mind in it, really knowing what it is and what you might be looking for, what you might report to DPIRD, especially through my pest guide reporter or anyone you think. Please let someone know. The idea, I will say it now, I'll say it again, don't touch it, take a photo, send it in, let an expert tell you what it is, because these spores can just spread like that. They are just like powder and dust, and you wouldn't even know that you have it just on the cuff of your shirt, and you could be moving it around. This was it in 2023. These are just a couple of videos, again, just to show you how dry it is outside. You get the Alcifilla on the outside of the mound, and then you get the Leucodendra further in. It really is hard to get to, so we did go in by chopper. And this is the difference of that site. So you can't see the burn any longer on that site. Do this play the next video. And where they had quite an open area to walk through, this was incredibly busy. Getting in there, the rushes were well above my head at points just to get into the GPS locations of where they first found it in the previous year. So we went back in early June. So we were trying to go in just after the rains had had a bit of a chance to really kickstart the pathogen again. We went to the same mound spring and we found it only at 4 of those 6 subsites. So that was very interesting. We'd had recovery from the burn by that time as well. And we only found it on the Melaleuca leucodendra. And so maybe if we went back later, we might find it on the Alsophila at that outside. But I think also the recovery at the site was probably influencing a lot of the pathogen dynamics as well. Yep, these are the symptoms we saw when we were there this year. Again, typical type of symptoms. I try not to say it's beautiful, but it is a little bit, and it is so stunning, and you shouldn't see symptoms like this on any other Myrtaceae species. There's no other rust that causes anything on Myrtaceae. So if you see symptoms like this, if you're seeing anything yellow and fluffy, if you're not sure, just report it. Because we love negative reports as well. Negative reports help us to know where to focus our efforts and what people might confuse things with so that we can improve our communications as we move forward as well. Just to compare the 2 sites, and this is to show you the surveillance effort, the yellow and blue don't really mean much other than the number of reports from each of those areas. So you'll notice a lot of the more isolated areas maybe don't have as many reports. That's not that we haven't done as much effort, or everywhere that DBCA and DPIRD have surveyed in there has been usually trying to really narrow down on moist sites where we really think the rust will be. But the key differences, I guess, for us was really that difference between seeing a lower disease incidence and severity this year, which hopefully is good, and on just on that Melaleuca leucodendra, which sits in the most moisture that you can possibly have in those mound springs. Yeah, perfect. You have the technology. Awesome. But that said, in a way, it's a little bit of a good story. It fits with what we know about the biology of myrtle rust, how it's behaving up there. But the Southwest is just such a gem. You guys, everyone in this room knows it. There's a lot of Myrtaceae here, a lot of endemism. And as you can see from this map from Criticos 2013 with climate suitability, we weren't even really necessarily expecting it up in that top end. That said, though, these maps are on about 10K grids, that's not going to take into consideration all the microclimates that exist in those areas. But you can see the Southwest in particular is definitely at risk, and we want to be sure to protect all those species, and with high rates of endemism. If that endemism happens to exist in a super good microclimate, we could still see species lost somewhere in WA. So we just need to be really mindful about what that all means for us. Yep. It is. Yeah. Making this mistake. There we go. So in terms of preparedness, where are we at? So we continue to have a myrtle rust working group. Both DPIRD and DBCA sit on both a Western Australian working group and an Australian working group. There's lots of communications and awareness, including we've got signage at the Kununurra airport put in by DPIRD this last year, and they also put it in down, I think, in Bunbury because of the fly-in, fly-outs who come in over from Queensland. So trying to target some of those key places. We're doing quite a bit of, or there are a lot of sentinel surveillance sites set up. So between, I think, definitely FPC, DBCA, DPIRD have sites that they're going back to regularly. The team I now have the pleasure to lead and manage, they have set up a lot of sites and they've done a lot of training as well. So they have headed over to Queensland to see it in situ with Jeff Pegg, and actually I think he really put them to the test where he really tried to get down to some more difficult to find out symptoms, because we're looking for those bright yellow pustules, but anything that looks a bit out of whack and is twisting a leaf or whatever deserves a close look. So they had some good training on that. And we also have a PhD student, Eric, now at ECU with the primary supervisor of Anna Hopkins. I'm helping to co-supervise as well. So with that, he's going to try and cover epidemiology, especially that northwest of WA. Myrtle rust hasn't shown up in a lot of those types of places around the world, so we really don't understand the dynamics particularly well. So it'd be really nice to understand, trying to use Darwin as the closest kind of corollary that we have, what that looks like. Looking at host range, so there's a few things we know about host range in WA, but picking up on a few of our other species that we want to know about. Looking for host resistance in something like Agonis flexuosa. So it was actually the after dark cultivar that I think is hardly in any gardens now here in WA, certainly. It's a bit of an East Coast phenomena as well. That was actually the first species myrtle rust was ever found on in Australia. So it's definitely a known host. And there's obviously we've got a massive range. And so it'd be good to know what resistance we might have in that population. And then also looking at surveillance, how we can improve that by understanding, especially given it's such a human-driven pest that it can move on clothes, it can move with travellers. In terms of those large metropolitan areas and everything, where are the hosts, how are they linked, and how might it move somewhere like Perth or in the southwest if it did arrive? And part of that is knowing where to look in the first place and knowing where your hosts are. Awesome. I obviously came from DPIRD, but DBCA also strongly supports the use of the My Pest Guide Reporter app if you're not using it. It's where we capture a lot of our data. It's going through to experts constantly, and it means we can work as quickly and rapidly as possible. If you want to report your observations, or if you want to use PADIS as well, they're really great at taking a call and walking you through a few things. We send them there for a few Phytophthora things now as well, because they're very schooled in all of that. So anything unusual, myrtle rust, if it's just, and especially natural systems, I think our systems are going to be under more and more pressure. And the sooner we know what things are changing and how that looks, the better we are going to be off. So that's me done. I'm going to leave that up while I give any questions, just in case you need those details. Thank you.
A little bit of time. Any questions? Yes, download the My Pest Guide Reporter app. Any questions?
How much is the government investing in managing and preventing myrtle rust in the southwest?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to take it back to leadership and check with you. I mean, we sit on the myrtle rust working group, and we say, you know, there's definitely investments in people, but in terms of dollars, I think, yeah, I'd have to double check. And so we're trying to encourage and apply for as many different sources, but yeah, don't have a number to hand.
So myrtle rust's been in Australia for 10 years. Yeah. How can we support the government giving an appropriate level of funding to manage this?
I mean, this is always one of the hard things. That as a government agency, we obviously work through our leadership, but obviously if it's something that's of concern to you, you can certainly take it to your members who represent you in different ways. You can always get engaged with things like, well, it's on the East Coast, can do the Gumtree Guardians through iNaturalist. We obviously would still encourage anyone to report through My Pest Guide here. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is where NRM groups, anyone who has a voice in the room and can continue to raise it, it's probably one of the best things we can do. Yeah, I worked in Queensland in the early days, and it was hard to get people excited about something where it was going to be a 10-year timeline to see species loss. We knew it was coming from the outset because we'd seen it with Phytophthora, we'd seen it with lots of other invasive forest pests, and it's just so hard to see past that short term. Yeah.
And given what David Collard was saying, what sort of engagement's happening with the Noongar Nation across the southwest?
That's a good question as well. I have started some discussions, but haven't had a huge amount of discussions. And for me, that will include phytophthora as well as myrtle rust as a biosecurity threat. And we've had similar discussions with the North. Again, it comes down to a resource. Well, I hate saying resourcing. Everyone knows that. Yeah, is getting some pushes, but we're building as many relationships, and we're certainly sharing the resources we do have to date. So we've got really good websites, we've got really good comms materials ready from DPIRD and DBCA. And the good thing is we got a good shout out at the national working group that actually DBCA and DPIRD are on the same page with the type of messaging we're putting out. But in terms of traditional owners, I think there's a lot more work we can be doing. And I can even see that still even with phytophthora as well, you know, something that's been around here for decades. And I think there's been a lot of really good capacity built in DBCA, and I'm looking forward to trying to leverage that moving forward in my role. Yep.
Got a question from you at the back.
Yeah, so Mia's just asked about the NARC's Indigenous Ranger program in the North. I don't know anything off the top of my head. I think that'll be a continuing discussion as we move forward, and it's one of those odd things that, you know, even the state Aboriginal Ranger program is a DPIRD funded but DBCA delivered program. There's a lot happening in that space, really exciting space that I think we could be trying to tap into.
Got one more question before we go to morning tea.
I was just going to make a comment to Cameron's question earlier. The feds do support Aboriginal Rangers to do marine biosecurity surveillance in the remote regions. So there's a model there potentially that could be adapted for myrtle rust.
Yeah, no, and certainly even for myrtle rust, we know that our Queensland colleagues have gone into Northern Territory in particular to give them better tools to detect in some of those remote and regional places as well. So yeah, no, it's a good point. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Kylie.